how did you become involved in this case?
I was contacted in 2019 by a lawyer by the name of Allison Miller, who at the time was working for the Public Defender's Office.
All right, and when you were contacted with her, what do you do after being contacted with her by her?
Well, she essentially said that she had a case that she believed involved some potential trauma, and that she wanted me to do an evaluation specific to trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and that she was hoping to hire me. And so we went through the contract negotiations or the JAC appointment, things of that nature, at which point I went about scheduling a visit to see the defendant.
Okay. Prior to visiting with Shelby Nealy, did you review anything?
No, I did not.
All right. And how much time did you spend with Shelby Nealy the first time that you met with him?
The first time was on the 24th of April, 2019. I was there for 3 hours.
All right. And when you met with him for about 3 hours, was that here at the jail?
Yeah, they're in Pinellas County, yes.
Do you know if he was in protective custody at that time?
I honestly do not know.
Okay.
I know that we met in one of the rooms down there on the first floor. They brought him down to me. I don't know the status of his care at that time.
All right. What kind of information did you obtain during that meeting with Shelby Nealy?
Well, one of the things that's really important in these situations, and one of the areas where I've been relatively successful, is in building rapport with people in these situations, these forensic crimes and situations. People who have been through trauma have a hard time trusting other people. They've been hurt, they feel betrayed, they feel abandoned. So building a relationship and building trust helps to encourage the person to be more forthcoming, to be more truthful. I set up a condition of non-judgment and acceptance. So that was a large part of that first meeting. Beyond that, what we did was we started working our way through his life experiences, starting with his childhood, working our way through his life. Where was he born? Where did he go to school? What was school like? What was his mom like? What was his dad like? Just starting to kind of build a history of what he's been through up until that point.
Okay. So at this point, it's a self-reported history by Shelby Nealy to you.
Correct. And I know that in forensic settings, records are available and very helpful. And I do appreciate the use of records to corroborate things. Unfortunately, psychology is a subject that still to this point, we rely pretty heavily on self-report. Okay. There's no measure, there's no MRI, there's nothing like that can tell us what thought a person is having in their head. So unfortunately, the only way to get that sort of information is by self-report. It's something that I have to rely on fairly heavily in my clinical work in my office from the treatment angle, and so that's not really unusual.
Okay. Is it in fact common that people that talk to you about past trauma are not eager to talk about past trauma?
Absolutely. They're often very hesitant. Even people that I've been working with as a psychologist in a treatment setting for 6, 8, 10 years oftentimes will say, there's something I never told you, I want to tell you, but I'm scared, and we'll have to kind of work through it to get to the point where they're comfortable saying it. Most people who've been traumatized see the expression of emotion or the giving of personal details to another person as a thing that exposes them or makes them vulnerable to being attacked back. You're basically giving that person ammunition against you, telling them that you're insecure, telling them that you're depressed, telling them whatever actual facts about your life. So they're very hesitant to spill that over and to tell other people.
Okay. So as it relates to this initial meeting, you're building up trust. Tell the jury a little bit about what kind of information did Shelby Nealy give you during this initial meeting that assists you in evaluating his case and the circumstances surrounding his life?
Well, like I said, in this first one, we started from the beginning, from birth. So we talked about his mother and his father. We talked about them living in Texas, and that his mother had to flee that relationship because of domestic violence. He spoke about not really having a relationship with his father, not having contact with his father, that he did have a stepfather named Paul who was in his life from about the age of 3 on. He spoke about living in Ohio with his mother and his relationship with his mother, some of the positives of that relationship, some of the negatives or limitations of that relationship. We spoke about his curiosity about his father and the letter that he wrote to his father when he was 14, that he went to visit his father when he was 15, and that his father then subsequently committed suicide about 2 years later when he was 17, on the day after Mr. Nealy's birthday, actually. We spoke about the impact of that and how that event changed the course of his life, and the years that followed, which were very tumultuous.
During this initial meeting, does he mention anything about being sexually abused?
No, he did not.
If someone has been sexually abused, is it uncommon for them to not immediately disclose that?
No, in fact, it's very common for people to keep that to themselves and again, protect it for all the reasons I outlined earlier. But, when it comes to sexual encounters, they're that much more intimate, that much more personal. And in a lot of ways, especially for men, they can be viewed as embarrassing. And it's something that, particularly men don't willingly admit, without some sort of kind of coaxing or encouragement to be honest and open.
Okay. Does he describe a sexual relationship with the stepmother in any way, shape, or form during this initial meeting?
No.
Okay. You indicated that he talks about his mother the mother and Shelby Nealy leaving Texas for Ohio because of domestic violence that was taking place in the home.
He did,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. He was very young when he left Texas, right?
Yes, maybe a year old or just under a year. I believe he said he had been told that they left when he was 11 months old.
Okay. And so the likelihood is that when he tells you about what happened in Texas before they flee to Ohio, that's not something he remembers himself, but something that's been told to him by others.
Absolutely, and he did preface it by saying that. This is what my mother has told me.
Okay, all right. Trauma to the mother when she's pregnant and when she has a newborn and when that trauma is witnessed by the newborn, is that something that may impact the child? Is it trauma even though they don't remember the specifics?
Overall.
I'm sorry?
You can answer.
Okay, thank you, sorry. As far as the physiological part of a pregnant woman being abused, I can't really comment on that. That's out of my area of expertise.
Right.
I certainly know that there is research out there pointing to the mother's state of mind, the mother's feeling of safety and security and ability to relax and not feel anxious and things like that in terms of healthy pregnancy outcomes and prenatal development. So that is certainly a factor, especially if that abuse was going on while she was pregnant. Once the child is born, the concern that I have is for what we call attachment. The first year or year and a half of your life are very important in terms of your ability to attach to your primary caregiver. Now, in an ideal situation, that's your mother. Obviously, there are other situations where babies are adopted or things like that. But In this case, we're talking about the specific relationship between his mother, Lisa, and Mr. Nealy. And the development of a healthy attachment during that time is the foundation for self-esteem, self-confidence, your own identity, your own beliefs about yourself, not to mention your ability to connect with other people and your ability to trust other people. A secure primary attachment during that time is very important. And my concern is, and this is something that I did speak with Lisa about, his mother, on the phone, is that while she was giving as much time as she possibly could to Mr. Nealy when he was an infant, she was also dealing with this situation with her husband. She was, in danger of physical and verbal abuse, and then obviously the move is quite unstabilizing, kind of, chaotic, trying to get away, all of that stuff. So my concern is that it affected the relationship between them and may have had long-term, impact on Mr. Nealy or his mother moving forward.
So the trauma that you find out about during this initial interview, do you rate it at that point as far as the most significant, or do you do that at a later time?
I kind of do that at a later time when I've got the whole picture in front of me.
Right.
The other thing that's really important, and this is probably a good place to slip it in, is when it comes to trauma, psychology in general, but trauma specifically, it really has a lot to do with the individual and their perspective. So, what you might seem like a very traumatic experience to you or I might not be seen traumatically or with such intensity by the individual who's living it. Likewise, a situation that may seem like not as much of a big deal to some, to a third party, may be very, very traumatic to an individual who's actually going through it. So oftentimes we do have to rely on some level of self-report in terms of which traumas were most impactful, which ones were, the ones that really changed his view of his world, the view of himself, and affected his behavior and his ability to control his emotions. Because that's really what we're talking about here, is those traumas affecting his ability to function after the fact.
Okay. What is the next thing you do after you finish this initial meeting with Shelby Nealy?
Well, we went through a lot of information. We got through a lot of information, but I wanted to meet with him again. So I scheduled another interview soon following. It was on May 15th, 2019. And I returned to Clearwater to meet with him at that time.
Okay, and that was in the Pinellas County Jail again?
Exactly, yes. Every time I've met with him, it's been in the Pinellas County Jail.
Okay, same location?
Yes, I believe it was exactly the same room.
Okay. And tell the jury about that meeting.
So we started off, I started off asking some questions to fill in some gaps, specifically about his short relationship with his father, his emotions surrounding it, things of that nature. We then went into kind of continuing his social history, talking about his experiences, his experience with his experience and the turmoil that he went through after his father's suicide, which involved getting, the use of drugs, the use of alcohol, getting his girlfriend pregnant, dropping out of school, getting a job, being arrested a couple of times, having difficulties in that marriage, which led to some domestic violence charges, and then the dissolution of that marriage, which separated him from his daughter as well, and then there was a series of small-time jobs, homelessness, difficulty with his mother, basically just him trying to get on his feet until the time when he met his second wife, Jamie, and his feelings surrounding that. and moving forward into that part of his life.
Okay. What was your understanding of his relationship with his biological father?
Well, there was no relationship until the age of 14, at which point he was curious. He talked to me about the fact that his mother and Paul, he knows that they always loved him, and that they tried to care for them as best they could, but in his words, they just weren't really very good at it. He never felt a super strong connection, and so he reached out to his father, hoping that he was more like his father perhaps, and that he could find a connection to one of his caregivers that he could really latch on to. He talks about going to visit him. He talks about that trip being very good, very healing, very helpful. That he spoke with his dad. His dad tried to bring up the past and apologize. Mr. Nealy said kind of thanks, but no thanks, let's just move forward. But he reports it being a very positive visit. Again, at that time, we did not discuss his sexual relationship with his mother-in-law. But we did talk about his relationship with his father and how it gave him confidence and it made him feel better. He had been dealing with a lot of depression and a lot of depressive symptoms, feelings of self-harm and things like that as a teenager. So he really thought that maybe meeting his father was kind of a turning point, that maybe things would get better.
And I think you just said with his mother-in-law, you mean his stepmother, the sexual relationship?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, stepmother, yes.
Okay. But he doesn't bring it up during this second meeting?
No, he did not bring it up until I saw him in 2025.
Okay. All right. And again, is that unusual for him not to bring it up? Assuming it happened, is it unusual?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Assuming that it happened, is it unusual for someone not to disclose that type of behavior?
No, it's not unusual for someone to, hold something like that back in a clinical setting or with a psychologist or something like that. It is also not uncommon in these kinds of proceedings because oftentimes these defendants are getting input from their lawyers in terms of what they should talk about or shouldn't talk about or things like that. So there's a lot of factors.
Okay, all right. If it was Shelby Nealy's intent shortly after being arrested on these charges to fabricate being a victim of sexual abuse, would you expect that he would tell you about it and be eager to tell you about it right away?
Yeah, I would expect that if that was something that he, fabricated or made up for the purposes of trial, that he would have done it sooner, and also that he would have not had any hesitancy or issues admitting it, because it wouldn't carry the same emotional weight as if it actually occurred.
Okay. What's the next thing that you do? So you have these two meetings with Shelby Nealy back in 2019, right?
Correct.
What's the next thing that you do?
Well, at that point, I requested as many records, as relevant records, as the defense team had. But at some point there in late 2019, I basically lost contact with the defense team. I did not actually kind of know what the status of the trial was or the case, and I was the lawyer that had been on it was no longer on it, and I didn't honestly know what was going on. So there were several years there where I just kind of put my file away and preserved my records, but I didn't know what the status of the case was.
Okay. So and up until you were contacted by the current defense team, did you even know that there had been a change in as far as the team is concerned that represents Shelby Nealy?
Well, I knew that because I spoke to the lawyer who hired me, and she said she wasn't on the case anymore. But okay. I had not heard from any other legal teams or anybody in the interim until I heard from your team.
Okay, all right. So when you were contacted again in 2025, what do you do?
Well, I immediately want to schedule an appointment to meet with him, to reintroduce myself, to potentially, try and rebuild rapport. Obviously, being, absent for over 5 years does a lot to kind of, what's the right word, erode a relationship. So I wanted to get there, and I wanted to meet him again and talk to him and kind of reestablish connection.
When do you meet with him?
I met with him on the 28th of January, 2025.
Okay. And when you met with him on that particular date, who was present?
The mitigation specialist, Ms. Boland, was present with me on that occasion.
Okay. Tell the jury about that meeting and what kind of information you obtained from Mr. Nealy during that meeting.
Well, we spoke about a great number of things. We spoke about the time from January of 2018 to December of 2018, the time in between his wife's death and the commission of this crime, the intensity of the emotions that he felt during that time. We spoke in a little bit more detail about his wife Jamie's mental health issues, some of the struggles that he and his wife went through trying to trying to make that marriage work, and that things of that nature. We also spoke about the beginning of that relationship with Jamie and how he had just been coming off this time where his father had passed. He was he was acting out. He was doing drugs. He was drinking. He was, getting in trouble with the law, this reckless behavior, which is very common of people who go through traumas. They tend to kind of act out in that way to feel alive, essentially, to get that adrenaline rush and to move beyond the constant, anxiety barrage that they feel from their traumatic experiences. And he talked about how when Jamie and him first started dating, he was just so happy to be accepted and to feel loved again and to be wanted. And that when she started exhibiting mental health issues, specifically complications from bipolar disorder and schizophrenia or some sort of psychotic disorder, that he looked past it again because he was just so happy to not be homeless, to have a girlfriend, to have a place where he was in a relationship, to be having intimacy with another person, all of those things that he hadn't had for several years while being homeless and kind of struggling. That he looked past some of that, but that when she got pregnant and had to go off of her medication, that things got very bad very fast.
Did he talk to you about the domestic violence, particularly in his relationship with Jamie?
He did speak about violence, about her mood swings and her lack of medication management. He's spoken also about the issue involving her pregnancies. Their two children were essentially born, I think 11 months apart or something like that, a year apart. And that during that time, because of the changing in hormones and things like that, it was Mr. Nealy's theory that those hormones and things like that were exacerbating her psychotic symptoms, making them, kind of less well-regulated, making her more moody, more kind of outwardly expressive, and leading to more violence and more verbal abuse as well.
And when you say leading to more violence against Shelby Nealy?
Yes, that's what he said. He did admit that he had to at times, grab her arms, hold her back, even potentially maybe, make contact with a part of her body in a physical way as he was defending himself. But the description of the situations that he gave to me was that She was paranoid. She was very focused not only on him and whether he was cheating on her, which he said he was not, but also she was very jealous of his first marriage, of his first child. He said that she would get angry and beat him for just bringing up his first marriage or his first child, to the point that he eventually had to denounce them and say that that Mackenzie, his daughter from his marriage with Caitlin, was not his, to avoid the beatings.
During this meeting in January of 2025, did he bring up the sexual abuse?
No, he did not. I did not specifically ask about it, but he did not bring it up.
Okay. Do you meet with him again?
I did. Well, I met with him over Zoom, yes, one last time.
Okay. And when was that?
That was June 26th of 2025.
Okay. And tell the jury about that meeting.
Well, obviously it was limited a little bit, like this is limited by the technological kind of component. But Mr. Nealy and I worked very hard and very quickly. We were time limited. It was only 30 minutes allotted. And so we worked very quickly trying to make sure that we filled in any blanks. Mr. Nealy started off right off the bat by saying that he had not realized that we had not talked about the sexual relationship with his stepmother, that was something that he was not telling anyone, and that somewhere along in like the time period of 2021, he and a person that he was doing some form of therapy with agreed that it was good to talk about that and to get it out and to admit it and get it into the open. So we did speak about that. We spoke about the fact that for him, that relationship was not overly traumatic at the time. What he did say is that he was not emotionally ready for that relationship. That she was much older than him, that he had not had sexual partners or been in a sexual relationship like that, but that he believes that he fell in love with her while he was there, and that when he returned home, it was very difficult for him to get over that. He felt as though they connected. He was kind of very attached to her, and that, but he wasn't able to call her. He wasn't able to talk to her because of the fact that she was married to his father. Where this really becomes relevant from my perspective is that when his father does commit suicide just after his 17th birthday, Mr. Nealy immediately started to believe, or at least started to worry, that his sexual relationship with his stepmother was a contributing factor to his father's suicide. He was concerned that he, in some ways, that if his father had found out, that may have led to the suicide or caused the suicide in some way. And so that was very traumatic for him in that sense. He reported to me that as soon as he found out about his father's suicide, he was so distraught that he threw up repeatedly for about, I don't know, he didn't say how many hours, but he said for the rest of the night. And I get the impression that it was a very difficult time, a very difficult realization, and an unknown. Something he'll never have an answer to. He'll never know whether that was a factor or not. Something that he reported to me still bounces around in his head, and he still questions from time to time.
Whether or not
that infidelity had something to do with his father's suicide or not. Whether he had an impact on his father's decision to take his own life.
Okay. So the sexual relationship that's reported to you between Shelby Nealy and his stepmother, it appears that it was consensual in a sense. Is that accurate?
I mean, that's accurate, I think, to some level. You guys are the lawyers, so I'll leave it to you whether a 15-year-old can consent to an adult, sexual relationship. But, you know, certainly I don't think that she forced herself on him. I think that he was a willing participant, just again, not emotionally prepared for that kind of a relationship.
Okay. Well, doing the work you do, and both counseling and forensically, I'm assuming you know that it's considered sexual abuse when there is the age discrepancy and when one participant is a minor, right?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
no, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, and maybe part of the reason for that is the emotional, not being mature enough to understand everything that surrounds the strong feelings involved in those type of activities.
Oh,
Would you agree?
I do agree. I do think that, the emotional maturity and the intellectual maturity of a minor under 18 is the primary reason for that law. And of course, as we all know now, the brain doesn't fully develop until the age of 25, not 18. So that person is even less emotionally, and mentally prepared to handle that situation than we originally thought they were when they wrote that law.
Okay. What else do you review before you sit down and sort of try to figure out if you have some answers for us, for the jury, about Shelby Nealy?
Well, after my visit in January of 2025, I reached out to your office and essentially asked for records. Any records that were relevant. I had not seen any records up until that point, despite requesting them from the previous defense team.
Right.
So it was at that point that I got a great deal of records, and then was able to review those before my meeting with Mr. Nealy in June of 25.
Okay. And describe to the jury, what records did you review?
So the records that I reviewed, medical records from University Hospital, Cleveland Clinic, the Metro Health System, St. Vincent Charity Medical Center, records from the Cleveland Police Department, records from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, records from Broadview Heights, Ohio Police Department, records from Bethany Lutheran School, from Constellation Schools, Parma Community, which is in Parma, Ohio, jail records from the Pinellas County Jail, including medical and classification records, Pasco County Jail classification records, his father, Bobby Nealy's obituary, the divorce complaint between Lisa and Bobby Nealy, and I received all those records in one big pack, and then I did also receive a photo of a poem that was reportedly written by Mr. Nealy approximately 2 weeks ago to add to the list.
Okay. If I could have a moment. So, what do you do next? You have all these records. You've met with Shelby Nealy on multiple occasions. What's the next thing that you do?
Well, I also, as I stated this earlier, but just to make sure it's on the record, I did speak with his mother, Lisa, on the phone on June 11th, 2025. So it was after I received the records, but before the final meeting with Mr. Nealy.
All right. Tell the jury about your interview with his mother.
How did it? I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Tell the jury what kind of information did you learn during the interview with Lisa Svensson, his mother?
Essentially, it was her perspective of Mr. Nealy, her account of what happened in Texas with the violence from the biological father, her observations of Mr. Nealy across the time of his life. I asked some specific questions about things that Mr. Nealy had reported to me, things that you can't really corroborate with records, like the fact that he talks about being in his room all day after school, from the time he got home and essentially until he got up the next morning to go to school again. That his mother would bring food up and put it outside of his bedroom door or call him down to get it, and then he would take it back up to his room. Things of that nature. So we spoke, about her kind of experiences with Shelby up until the moment of this crime and his subsequent arrest.
Okay. Did the mother corroborate the domestic violence and during her pregnancy with Shelby Nealy and the first year of his life?
Yes, she did. Both physical and verbal. And she did, we did talk briefly about how that impacted her ability to care for Shelby and to give Shelby the time that she wanted. She spoke about it being a very stressful and chaotic time in her life. And that, while her son Shelby was her primary concern, there was a lot of other things going on as well. And that it was a difficult time for her, and that I asked her if it was possible that it affected her infant and her relationship with her infant, and she said, I don't see how it could not, or I don't see how it couldn't have, or something along those lines.
Okay. Did you talk to her about Shelby Nealy's father committing suicide, shooting himself?
We did talk about that. We talked about Shelby reaching out to his father, about his visit to Texas, about changes in his behavior when he returned from Texas, and also about the shock and the impact that his father's suicide had. Lisa saw it kind of from two perspectives. Number one, that he had been curious about his father. He had reached out and had a good meeting with his father, and then his father was taken away from him almost as quickly as he kind of got a father, he was gone. And that was very hard on her son. She also spoke about the fact that this was the first real loss that Shelby had ever experienced, and that he was particularly hurt by the fact that it happened the day after his birthday, that it happened so close to his birthday, and kind of almost felt like that was perhaps a message, something that potentially contributed to the feelings about the relationship, the impact of the relationship with the stepmother.
When you spoke with Lisa, Shelby's mother, you said it was in June of this year?
June 11th, yes.
June 11th. At that time, did Lisa know anything about the sexual abuse?
She did not.
Okay. When you talked to Shelby Nealy and he confided in you about the sexual abuse, was he concerned about how it would impact and affect his mother if she found out about it?
Very concerned. His primary concern was the impact that it would have on his mother if she found out.
Okay. Did you do any other interviews?
No, I did not.
All right. And so you've reviewed the records. You've conducted the interviews that you talked about here today. What is the next thing you do as it relates to your expertise as a forensic psychologist?
I mean, essentially, I sat down and I set out to do what I was supposed to do. I had gathered as much information as I thought I could at that time, so I sat down and determined that Mr. Nealy, by his self-report and the evidence of the records and the experiences he's been through, my professional opinion is that he suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, as outlined in the DSM-5 TR at the time of this evaluation. I can't go back in time and tell you how long he suffered from PTSD. It's unethical to diagnose someone that you haven't evaluated, and I never evaluated 15-year-old or 17-year-old Shelby Nealy. But I can tell you that the symptoms and the experiences that he had During that time, particularly his father's suicide, followed by the behavior, and then the first marriage, the homelessness, the second marriage, that period of time right there is very kind of, how do I say this? It's very typical kind of behaviors and reactions of people who've been through traumatic experiences or who are in an emotional crisis actively.
Okay. So you mentioned the suicide of his father as a traumatic event, right?
Yes.
You mentioned homelessness as a traumatic event. Tell the jury a little bit more about what you understood as far as homelessness is concerned.
Well, essentially, after his first divorce, before he met Jamie, he was still very angry at his father for taking his life. He was still acting out. He was still having difficulty. He didn't have a place to live. There were times where he lived in a shed behind his mother's house when it was warm. There was times when he lived in a van in an alley that he borrowed from a friend. But what he reported to me in terms of being homeless was that it was very hard. He suffered greatly, especially in the wintertime, sleeping in a van. And that he was very hurt by what he saw as a betrayal, in that his mother and his stepfather Paul would not take him in, even in those kind of what he saw as very dire circumstances. Being homeless, freezing, bad snowstorms, living in Ohio. It certainly gets very cold there. But he saw that as a betrayal. He saw that from an emotional standpoint, it was very traumatic. Aside from it being, very painful and uncomfortable and scary, terrifying, really. Sleeping in a freezing van.
Did he talk to you about the murder of Jamie?
He did. It was during 2019, because that case had not yet occurred at that time. So I was not sure which case, or if both cases perhaps I was going to be called to testify at. I wasn't really sure, so I covered my bases. He spoke about the pattern of behavior with Jamie, of not only threatening and trying to hurt Shelby, but also trying to hurt their children, or using the threats of danger against their children to control his behavior and to kind of keep him under control or on track. He spoke about the night in question, about the fact that she was holding their daughter and holding a knife and threatened to kill her to stop her from crying, and that he felt the need to stop her and to protect his child, and so he did.
During the time period following that murder, so during 2018, from about January up until he comes back to Florida in December of 2018, did he talk to you about the life he was living during that time period, the lies he was telling, and his struggles?
He did. He talked about the lies that he was telling, the cover that he was, attempting to keep up with Jamie's family, so that they believed that she was still here and would not, push harder and investigate. He spoke about the fact that up until this point in his life, he had worked very hard to compartmentalize and repress his emotions so that he didn't feel them. Now, there's a couple levels to this. So first and foremost, his mother is very matter of fact. She's not an emotional person. She's not a lovey, huggy, kind of outwardly emotive person. She's very straightforward, very honest, very blunt. And so that was modeled for Mr. Nealy as he grew up. And that's certainly a factor in what has happened. Beyond that, Mr. Nealy reported having issues with depression in his, say, tween to young adolescent years, and that he would approach his mother and Paul about his depression, and they would respond in what I would call a very invalidating way. There was no, "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, like what can we do, or do you want to talk to somebody?" There was none of that. It was, according to Mr. Nealy, it was much more defensive, much more, well, we give you everything you could possibly ever want. What right do you have to be depressed? Or what right do you have to be sad? And so, Mr. Nealy learned a couple of things from those encounters, which happened fairly regularly by his self-report. First and foremost, he learned that they don't care, and that, second, he wasn't going to get any help or any support from them. And so he learned to swallow those feelings, to numb himself, to essentially try and push those feelings down as hard as he could. And this becomes relevant because during the year between these crimes, Mr. Nealy was experiencing a intensely, anxious-filled, fear-filled, emotional experience while he attempted to hide and to cover up what was going on. And he reported great levels of distress during that year, to the point of paranoia, to the point of sitting in a room after the kids go to bed and just sitting there staring at his wife's phone, hoping that it wouldn't, beep or buzz with a text message that he would have to respond to her family to protect himself and his children as he saw it.
Okay. Are you able to opine whether or not he was suffering from PTSD when he killed Jamie?
No.
Okay.
Not ethically, no.
Okay. Are you able to opine that he certainly had suffered significant trauma in his life up until that point?
Based on self-report, based on mom's corroboration, I can certainly opine that he was, that he had a trauma in his life, that trauma appeared to have a significant impact on him, that he was exhibiting behaviors that are similar to people who have traumatic experiences, and that, it all kind of fits or leads towards the conclusion that he likely was suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress. But again, I cannot diagnose him with PTSD without having actually evaluated him.
Sure. And is that also true for later on in December of 2018 when he kills her parents and brother? Or
I'm sorry, sir. Can you talk into the microphone?
I apologize.
A little bit.
I'm usually pretty loud, but I apologize. Is that also true for December of 2018 when he kills Jamie's brother and parents?
Absolutely. I mean, based on self-report, based on, again, interview with mom, he was under a great deal of stress. He certainly was what he described as in survival mode, trying to just make it from day to day and protect himself and his children. And I can, again, say there was plenty of evidence of trauma, the same traumas that were present at the commission of the first crime are certainly present at the commission of the second crime, plus any experiences he had in between that, dealing with pressure and intense emotional reaction, and his inability to handle those intense emotional reactions. But I can't diagnose him with PTSD, no.
Okay. But after that, during the sessions that you met with him up until recently, at this point in time, you're able to diagnose him with PTSD?
Yes, I believe that he met criteria for PTSD in 2019 when I saw him.
Okay.
He was functioning better when I saw him in 2025, but I still believe that he meets criteria for PTSD at that time. And I'm confident and within my ethical rights to say that.
All right. You are familiar with the fact that he has written a book and self-published a book?
He told me that when we spoke recently. Yes, I have not seen the book, read the book. I didn't honestly even look it up. He just said that he had written a book, that it was fiction, and that it was on Amazon.
Okay, all right. The fact that he's written a book, regardless of, having not read it and not knowing a lot about it, does that have an impact on your diagnosis?
No,
Okay.
not really.
Okay.
There's a lot of books, and a lot of them are published, and some of them maybe shouldn't have been. I mean, I'm not a literary critic, so I apologize.
That's okay. It's okay. Have one moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
There is no doubt, based on the information that you've seen and that you're aware of, that Shelby Nealy has done quite a bit of lying over the past 6 years. Would you agree?
I would.
Okay. That being said, he has also made some very truthful confessions that appear to be very much the truth, right?
Correct?
Okay. And things that have been corroborated.
Correct.
And with the exception of the sexual abuse information, would you agree that the rest of the information, to some degree, has been corroborated by his mom and by the records that you reviewed?
Yeah, with, again, the one exception of what we talked about way back at the beginning of this, which is the fact that no one can really tell us what's going on inside of his head.
Sure. Sure.
So, but I agree with you in terms of, him talking about the impact of certain events, his mother corroborating, the changes in his behavior, et cetera, which give us some indication of what may be going on inside of his head.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Cross-examination.